Good day, everyone. Just to familiarize you all with We Change and the work that we do. We Change is short for Women's Empowerment for Change Jamaica, and it is a community-based organization, meaning that we are comprised of members of the community that we serve, and we advocate and provide services for queer Jamaican women specifically, and all women generally, with a particular focus on gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health. Our organization enlists a Black feminist understanding of liberation as the foundation from which we think through what justice, safety, and healing looks like for Black queer Jamaican women. One of the ways in which we do that is to interrogate notions of the Black woman's body as a site of exploitation, and how that notion tells us that our bodies are not ours, but are under the ownership of men and the state. When engaging advocacy work in Jamaica, especially around anything concerning women's exertion of power and control of ourselves and our bodies, the church is an adversarial entity that we have to contend with. So for the next few minutes, I'll be looking at how the church, in tandem with the state, continues to usurp efforts toward access on a practical level for queer Jamaican women and ultimately our liberation, as well as how the church can act as a conduit for change based on its positionality as an important aspect of community relations. The genealogy of Black women affirming their right to make decisions about their bodies goes back further than a century. Historians like Shakira Maxwell and Barbara Bush have made note of enslaved women engaging in abortive practices, from concocting and consuming a cocktail of herbs to terminate their pregnancy. The activism around radicalizing both legislation and cultural norms to be safer for people who need abortive services has been going on in Jamaica for several decades, with the most progress being seen in 2007, when a committee was organized by the Ministry of Health to review the law and make recommendations, which resulted in the Abortion Policy Review Advisory Group's final report, which has since been shelved. Our recent advocacy around abortion laws being nullified was met with admonition brought by the state, painting women's rights groups as immoral, for lobbying on behalf of women for their right to their bodies. The church's stance has been informed by its belief system, which sees women as subservient to their husbands and sown through the lens of caregiver and reproductive entity. These forced roles on women hinders their ability to successfully challenge a state whose legal system is steeped in colonial law informed by Christian beliefs. It therefore speaks to the power of the church as an institution that holds within the state its beliefs and practices, which supersedes that of the citizens who are most affected by this particular legislation. It begs us to question the validity of the church as an entity capable of informing legislation in these modern times. We particularly find this challenging as it becomes difficult to use a democratic process for change when it has been birthed from a traditionally oppressive system for women. An important thing to note during this recent iteration of challenging the abortion legislation is the access to resources that churches and Christian organizations had that allowed them to mobilize greater support and funds for far-reaching campaigns that NGOs like We Change did not have the capacity to. Churches and church leaders were able to access and weaponize the media to spread their anti-choice sentiments, which one can theorize was possible because of the church's political power within the state. Meanwhile, during the same period, We Change was only able to organize a demonstration outside of the Jamaica Parliament, which enjoyed very little attention from the media personnel. In 2018, an all-island poll was conducted by Johnson Survey Research Limited titled A Woman's Right to Choose. It showed that 42% of respondents strongly agreed that abortion was immoral, 20% only agreed, and 18% disagreed. This, among other claims, have been used to label Jamaica as a Christian nation. However, the study could also be used to infer that women are vulnerable to violence, and their choice to access abortion should not be based on a religion that was forced on the predecessors of this Christian nation. The Buggery Law and the Church's response. The Buggery Law in Jamaica criminalizes anal sex, placing queer relationships in precarious situations as it makes them criminals for intimate acts. Each time that a conversation arises in the public arena to lobby the state to repeal the law, the loudest voice against this is always the church. In 2014, the Gleaner commissioned the Bill Johnson poll, which revealed that 91% of Jamaicans believe lawmakers should make no attempt to repeal the Butler Law. The total number of participants was 1,208 residents of Jamaica, a minute fraction of the population. Again, in 2017, when the law was passed before Parliament to be reviewed, questions arose regarding whether or not harm was being caused by the law and the potential mischief that amending it would yield. In these instances, the church has claimed that the morally vacant lifestyle of queer persons puts society at risk as it opens the door to public broadcasts on the various forms of sexuality and normalizes the realities of different forms of lifestyle practices. This view perpetuates the idea that society will morally decay if the Butler Law is repealed, making this perspective inept of critical analysis as it does not see the long-term value of reviewing the law. It is not open to public education of biases which leads to inclusive practices in health for all citizens, acknowledging that all citizens are equal by law through public broadcast and affirming all forms of relationships between consenting adults. While the church is vocal in conversations on the Butler Law and abortion, the same cannot be said for instances of gender-based violence. GBV is steeped in patriarchal beliefs of the subjugation of women in service to their husbands. It is therefore no surprise that on this issue, there has not been visible support from the church. In 2019, as murders of women were splattered in newspapers and on news broadcasts, there had not been a statement made by church groups. Should we infer then that women are only vulnerable while they are alive for the state to continue manipulating power to claim ownership of their bodies? It is perplexing that the practices of consensual adults within their established relationships become public discussion. But on the topic of lives being ended prematurely, the church is silent. Are the victims not worthy of outrage? Do they not subscribe to the status quo of heteronormative relationships, but still there is silence when they have been murdered? The sanctity of marriage and hetero relationships becomes a weapon against women as the state and church then believes it is not their place to intervene. In 2016, a pastor, 64 years old from a Moravian church in St. Elizabeth, was arrested and charged for 2 counts of having sex with someone under the age of 16 years old. Though the pastor was suspended from his duties in light of the allegations, this church and church members were less inclined to swiftly denounce the actions of their pastors and provide support for the victims. They instead intercede on behalf of their shepherd with the intention of proving the devil wrong. That is the kind of battle that we must contend with as advocates. It wasn't until 2 years later that the Moravian Church broke their silence to share initiatives that they would now put in place to keep this from occurring. We would like to recommend the next steps to be considered for advocacy on behalf of all the groups involved. 1, there needs to be absolute separation between religion and the state. Humanity has developed significantly to be able to analyze their political landscape to infer the legislative reform necessary to take us to the next stage of our evolution. In instances where they are not in the public interest, those of the population who are able to suggest better practices should do so and utilize the democratic process to ensure that laws represent all citizens to be impacted. As a society, we need to acknowledge that the Bible was intended as a guide and not the end-all to human life. Much has changed from biblical times, and the laws need to accurately reflect the realities of all people. The conversations therefore need to evolve beyond what has been established to eliminate or reevaluate morality in light of these realities. People's lives do not occur within the binary of good and evil or black and white. Morality has been limited to this sole measurement and puts those who fall outside of these established areas at risk of violence and exploitation. Therefore, there is a responsibility on those who continue to push this narrative to make changes to their perspective that are informed beyond their own personal biases and belief systems. Additionally, we need to acknowledge the limitations of the stories in the Bible due to inaccuracy in translation. The version of the Bible that has been publicly used, known as the King James Version, is a compilation of stories selected to be published by King James. This then means that by using his power granted by a patriarchal system, one man was able to decide to manipulate the strongest form of control to his will. How then can we accurately say that all that was translated was a true essence of the scripture? Should we not scrutinize the validity of principles that have informed legislation for so long? In closing, we would like the church to expand its understanding of its responsibility to people to use its massive platform to advocate for women's rights in instances of gender-based violence. The church community extends into spaces that may not be accessible to widespread public education services, and its role to present an unbiased view that is informed on theory that accurately reflects the realities of all persons. There needs to be better accountability in issues of sexual violence and child abuse that members of the clergy are accused of. In these instances, there should be established protocol that requires the church to ensure that justice is not partial because of the position held by the individual. We have seen where in these instances there are no established protocols, the church becomes divided due to the bad actions perpetrated by one individual, and conflicted members believe they must support the individual as they undergo the course of justice. Thank you.
Shantae, thank you very much indeed. You picked on something which I think I mentioned myself, the paradox of the laws of the former colonial master are still ruling us from his grave, as if we're still saying, yes, massa, yes, massa. It's a very strange phenomenon, and sadly the Christian right have not moved forward either. It's as if the idea of the stern God up there issuing orders backed by threats is all we've got for religion. The Holy Spirit has never winged its way of love down the arches of the Christian centuries. Well, it has, and there's no turning back. And for what it's worth, I'm with Gamaliel. If it's of God, it will last. If it's of man, it won't. And they have had their day by God's grace. So thank you, dear, for that very nice presentation. Well, we're into the question and answer session now.